Polls across America start to close after voters cast their ballots to pick the next president of the United States. It's the first time the country has held a presidential race amid a pandemic, and also the first time there has been such a massive early voting turnout. More than 100 million voted before November 3rd by post or in person, and that's nearly 75% of the 2016 electorate. The overall turnout is expected to be unprecedented, but for the dust to settle, it may take days or, as some experts warn, even weeks, as all the ballots will not be counted on election night. As we wait to get an inkling of who might emerge as the winner, we connect with Mika Solna, breaking news reporter at the Washington Examiner in DC. It's lovely to see you. Thank you for joining our programme. We're also joined by Mark Shanahan, Professor of Politics at the University of Reading, who also edited the book, The Trump Presidency. Now, we're going to start with you, Mika, in DC. Now, it was America's first presidential election to be held amid a pandemic. Can you paint us a picture of what it's looking like at the voting stations at the moment?
Yeah, so obviously we're in very unprecedented times, as you mentioned. Polling stations are taking a number of precautions to make sure voters are safe who do choose to go in person into the polls. Poll workers are definitely using a lot of sanitation methods, wiping down stations every time somebody uses it to cast their ballot. They're also encouraging voters to come in wearing masks and social distance at a 6-foot length. We've seen some long lines in some cities, including Philadelphia, which is in the swing state of Pennsylvania, as well as in New York City and a few other places in the U.S. Other places, such as Maine, we've seen voters waiting in the snow and in the cold. So definitely there are people that are out there today, despite that there's been already 100 million people that have voted already early before Election Day.
And as you just said, more than 100 million Americans voted early by post or in person. That's again, over 75% of the 2016 electorate. And while the rest went to the ballots on Tuesday in America, where a huge turnout of Republicans were expected to offset the Democrats' early voting advantage, how do you expect the total turnout to be as polls start to close across the US? And how long do you think we'll have to wait for the early signs of the likely winner?
So states will start counting the ballots today once polls close. Again, it's unsure exactly how many Republicans may come out versus Democrats today. Strategists say that more Republicans may be more likely to go in person and at the polls today than in early ballots. Data has shown that more registered Democrats than registered Republicans have voted early, either by mail or went to the polls if that was an available option for them. But again, just wanted to remind that because somebody's registered with a party does not necessarily mean that they vote for a candidate in that party. So it all depends on who shows up and how the votes fall down the line.
Right, now let's bring in Dr. Mark Shanahan. Now, how are you feeling this evening? I mean, looking at the polls in the US, the voting in the US.
I guess normally we would have a decent indication of who would be the likely winner. Right up until 2016, we tended to trust the polls quite a lot. This time round, people have been an awful lot more skeptical of the polls, even though they've hardly moved right across the campaign. Biden has had a lead throughout. And while they have narrowed a little bit in the last few days, they haven't narrowed that much. But we know Trump has a very, very good ground game. He gets his voters out in those swing states that matter. I was looking at Florida a little while ago, and the Republican vote is definitely up there. They certainly appear to be more Republican voters out on the ground today and voting. But they may have to catch up quite a large Democrat lead. It would seem that Democrats are driven much more by fear this time round, the fear of another 4 years of Trump, and thus have got their votes in early. Obviously, this is coupled with COVID, which is making a lot of people vote by mail. There are fewer independents around this time. What the Republicans will hope is that very few of those independents actually turn up at the polls, because probably they are more likely to vote for Biden and the Democrats. This really is Biden's race to lose, but he could lose it Trump could spring a surprise, much as he did in 2016, and could win this race again.
Well, Mika, what do the odds look like right now? I mean, does it seem that the early opinion polls might be right? I mean, they were wrong last time, and if they're wrong again and President Trump is able to extend his presidential term, then do you think the pollsters should just pack up and really call it a day?
Well, so pollsters are saying that they've made significant adjustments from 2016 after they wrongly predicted that Hillary Clinton would win. Obviously, that's not the case, and President Trump kind of almost shocked a lot of the media world and a lot of these the academic world who are preparing for a Clinton victory, right, in 2016. So pollsters, some of the adjustments they see that are different this time around is Biden has a more significant lead than Clinton did in the same period of the election cycle. National polls are matching swing state and state polls and district level polls more evenly than they did in 2016, and that there are less undecided voters this time around than there were in 2016. So more people have made up their mind to either vote Republican or Democrat, a few months prior to the election day than there probably was last time around. So those are some of the differences. Whether they'll make a difference, we'll have to see depending on what the results and if Biden really does become victorious as polls suggest.
Right, and we just won't know until the results are in. But, well, Mark, upon the outcome of the 2016 election, we learned about the rather unique demographics that backed President Trump. And, of course, they were inclined to oppose immigrants, imports, and they felt rather marginalized by the elitist ideals of modern US society. And if President Trump is re-elected, then what do you think we'll learn about American society this time around?
That it's a pretty angry society still, that it's a very polarized society, and that the 200 million people who live in the flyover states, in those square states in the middle of the country, still feel that Washington is not representing them. So they would still go for the outsider. It will show perhaps a country that hasn't learned much over the last 4 years. That still is looking to this outsider president to deliver for those marginalized people or those who see themselves in the white working classes particularly as being left behind, looking for him to do something for them, when actually, if one looks at the last 4 years, they haven't benefited hugely from the policies that he's delivered. If you're super rich, you've probably done an awful lot better out of Trump's America than if you are lower middle class. But still, they put their faith in somebody who sounds a little bit like them, speaks their language, has said he will fight for them, and is darned good when he gets up and campaigns at one of those rallies that draws people in time and time again. He may have nothing much new to say, but those people who liked him in 2016 still absolutely love him and will largely come out and vote for him. What he may not get this time round is the people around the margins of that vote, particularly suburban people, women who don't love Donald Trump and may well vote for Biden this time round. But whoever wins, we are seeing a country that needs a lot of healing and a lot of drawing together with two political parties that have gone in opposite directions.
And we saw that strong support for President Trump in his recent rallies, and there he was encouraging his supporters to really observe voting stations for fraudulent irregularity. And there have been concerns that there might be voter suppression or even violence on the day of the election. And Mika, it seems like it was relatively calm compared to what people were sort of bracing themselves for. But our authorities, they're still sort of preparing for such eventualities, and especially once the results are out. I mean, as the president himself has threatened that he may not accept the outcome of the election.
Yeah, so there have been some reports today even that there's been some targeting of misinformation, claiming that some polling places aren't letting in Republicans or throwing away Trump ballots. So a lot of that is coming from the right today, is from the reports that I have seen. But there is misinformation also targeting Democrats that we have seen today, or just in general, just trying to undermine the integrity of the election process. So some cities are preparing for potential civil unrest to break out. In Washington, D.C., the businesses have started boarding up pretty early from November 2nd even, in preparation for what might come out tonight. In the city of Chicago, they've enacted like an election security plan and increased their police presence in case of unrest. And that is something that we've seen over the summer in the wake of protests that have sometimes turned violent and into longer episodes of possible rioting. And that's something that I think local, state, and federal officials are prepared for, especially in this highly unprecedented and highly anticipated election.
Right, and there have also already been lawsuits being thrown around as well in some states, and it looks like even after Election Day, the unrest or the uncertainty is going to continue for quite some time. Now, Mark, the Senate race, we can't forget the Senate race, of course, which has also been very fierce. There are 35 seats up for election in the Senate, and the Democrats need to win 4 seats to gain a majority and 3 if Joe Biden wins. Do you think the Democrats are in with a good chance of gaining control of the chamber? And what would the outcome mean for the next US president?
If it's straight ticket Democrats voting, Biden wins and the Democrats flip 4 seats in the Senate, given that they're going to hold on to the House, we will have through the line Democrat control. And they could easily win in places like Maine, in North Carolina tonight. Mark Kelly in Arizona, the candidate running for the Republicans, is a Top Gun pilot. Martha McSally, the first woman ever to lead a combat squadron in the Air Force. So what could the Democrats put up against her in that fight? Well, they put an astronaut in there. So you have these somewhat celebritized elections that are happening at Senate level, and the Democrats are doing well in those races. Michigan, another one, Gary Peters could well win that race. So chances are the more Democrats who get out and vote, and they need to get young people out, they need to get minorities out, supporting not just the Biden and Harris ticket, but then voting in these states where the Democrats have a chance of flipping seats blue. What could happen, of course, is that Trump wins at the top of the ticket, but then loses the Senate. And that would be 4 years of purgatory for him, because he would have a legislature that is opposed to his policies and would put up barriers to him getting anything done in his second term of presidency. It would be something of a lame duck presidency when he is fighting against his own Congress the whole way through. If Trump wins, it is likely that he would hold the Senate as well, though, because it would mean that those Republicans have got out in very significant numbers. And while the Democrats may pick up a couple of seats, they might not do quite enough to turn the Senate blue.
Now, before we wrap up, Mark, of course, this election is being observed by everyone around the world, really. And even putting the coronavirus pandemic aside, this may have been the most bizarre US election we've seen, preceded by a rather bizarre presidency. What are America's traditional allies hoping to see after this election?
Boring American politics. I think most of the rest of the world would be pulling for Joe Biden tonight, somebody who would go to the UN and act like a grown-up, somebody who would take NATO seriously and work with allies, someone who would work with alliances all around the world, not trying to make funny under-the-table bilateral deals, not somebody who is going and feting Putin and Xi and Kim just north of the border with you. I think we would like a period of normality, and with the norms of international relations returned. With Trump, we know we'll get 4 more years of chaos and disruption, and who knows what could happen in those times.
Well, perhaps boring would be a very welcome development for the world, but hopefully we'll see a clear winner emerge sooner rather than later after this hectic week. But this is where we have to wrap up the discussion. That was Mika Solner, breaking news reporter at the Washington Examiner in Washington, D.C. And we were, of course, also joined by Dr. Mark Shannon, Professor and Head of Department for Politics and International Relations at the University of Reading. Thank you both so much for your time.
Thank you.
Thank you.
And to our viewers, thank you for watching. We'll be back at the same time tomorrow here in South Korea with more updates on the US elections, of course. Until then, have a great day or evening wherever you are. Goodbye.